Hi, and welcome to Something to Talk About. I'm Linda McNamee, and for the next hour, we're going to talk about mental health, particularly around new parents or people who are hoping to be new parents. So please stay tuned. I think you will find our conversation very enlightening. I can't wait to get into all of the details. We are live this evening, so if you would like to give us a call tonight, you can always call us at 781-270-9199. I got that right. Yay. Or you can always email me at talk@bcattv.org if you have a suggestion for a future topic, or if you forget the details for tonight's episode and you think of a question later. talk@bcattv.org is always available. As always, I would like to thank the crew for this evening. John Villas and Chris Flaherty are staff members here, making sure that us volunteers keep everything standard and don't set the place on fire, which I haven't yet. We also have Chris Rose and Jolie Atwood, who have graciously given up their Wednesday evenings to come hang out here at BCAT. Last but not least, I want to thank my husband Paul for staying home for Daddy Date Night. Although Daddy Date Night is getting a little easier lately. So now, I think all housekeeping is aside, I want to welcome my wonderful guest for this evening, Amy Colozzo. Colosso. Okay, I should have checked that before.
That's okay.
And you are a perinatal mood disorder specialist.
I am, correct.
And until you contacted me, I did not know what perinatal was.
I know.
I've heard of prenatal
Yep.
and
Postpartum.
Postnatal.
Postnatal.
And I'm just like, okay, what's perinatal?
Yeah.
So anyway, welcome.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
So before we get really into the topic at hand, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, how you came to the Burlington area,
Sure.
and what path kind of led you to doing the work that you do today?
Sure. So originally I grew up in San Diego. So I know, weather is much nicer. I miss it daily. I grew up in San Diego.
We don't have as many earthquakes around here.
I know, that's true. I don't know though, this heat right now, I may take an earthquake over the heat. But I don't like the fire, so 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I went to up to Los Angeles for college, got my bachelor's at Cal State Northridge, got my master's at UCLA in social work. Met my husband along the path. He's originally from Arlington.
Oh, okay.
So
I was wondering, that was
right,
my
that's
next
how we
question.
migrated out
Okay.
here. So we stayed in LA and San Diego for a couple years. We had our first daughter, and then in 2014 we moved out here, stayed in Arlington for a bit, and then settled in Burlington. And we're quite happy here.
Burlington's a very nice
Yeah, we've been really excited and happy to be here.
Yay! So, what made you decide to focus on the perinatal audience?
Yeah,
I
the
guess?
period, sure. So that's a kind of a long-winded answer, but I'll try and stay concise.
Oh, we can take
So I'm fortunate to be a social worker. I'm a licensed social worker. I love social work. Part of why I love it is that you get flavors of all types of different places. So I've done medical social work. I've done psychiatric emergency room social work.
That right there sounds scary, but okay.
I love it though. I've done addiction work. And since moving out here, I focused more on traditional psychotherapy. So I was part of a group practice, and a couple years ago I opened up my own private practice, so went to work for myself. After having
That's got to be tough.
It's tough in blessings. I feel very fortunate to be able to do it. Along my own path of having my children, I had one daughter in San Diego. My youngest is almost 6 out here. And I'd always been drawn to postpartum women's mental health, and it really wasn't until having my own kids and realizing, oh my gosh, this is a life transition.
This is real.
This is real. And then getting a couple years out of the trenches, finding, oh wow, there are so many people who need help and want help and don't know it. So a couple years ago, I started taking more specific trainings, more courses. And my certification, the PMH-C, which is Perinatal Mental Health Certification, is under Postpartum Support International, which is an international organization. And they offer a certification course. And so I took that exam, and that's kind of now my full focus of my practice is mainly that. I also volunteer with PSI. They have a Massachusetts chapter.
Oh, cool.
And so I volunteer as a support coordinator. I cover the North Shore, so we help any moms, dads, family members who call in looking for help for services, trying to connect them to resources.
Wow. Now, with the certification process, how often do you have to get recertified?
Sure. So I'm lucky with that. Almost like my licensing exam, I don't have to get relicensed for social work or the certification, but you have to take like ongoing CEUs, so ongoing courses every year. There's a certain amount to require to fulfill it. So
Kinda
similar,
like teachers.
right? Exactly. Kind of like teachers. Same with my social work license too. So in order to maintain the active certification.
Now, are you limited to practice just in Massachusetts?
So I am, and that's not because of the perinatal specialty. That's my social work license. I'm only licensed in Massachusetts.
Wow.
Yep, so we're state specific. So same with psychologists, medical doctors, you have to be licensed where you practice.
Okay, so what exactly is perinatal health?
Yeah.
Because like we said, we've heard, prenatal, postpartum, and it's like, okay, what's perinatal? It's a new word for me.
It is a new word. I know it's a new word for a lot of people. I think it was a new word for myself as well when I started the training. So perinatal covers any period, pregnancy planning, during pregnancy, through postpartum. I think there's this big misconception. Postpartum is, 6 weeks, you have a baby, you're postpartum, you're done. And so we look at perinatal mental health as during pregnancy, during family planning and trying, through really that first year of birth. So up until baby's a year old. Now that doesn't mean that, okay, my baby's 2 and I'm having problems. Well, then we ask, okay, well, when did you start having problems? Because a lot of people won't, they don't know they're suffering, or they're not reaching out until 18 months, 24 months.
Or they just think it's normal,
Right.
I just had a baby, so it must be hormonal, and eventually
It'll just
I'll
get
be
better.
back to normal.
Right, exactly.
So, anyway, so one thing that you had just mentioned was the pregnancy planning process. I've known several people who have had difficulty getting pregnant and have looked at options like adoption or, fertility treatments. And how does somebody go about looking for help during that phase, because they're still holding out hope that they're going to be parents?
Sure. Well, and I think, and I love that you touched on that, in that we think that, I'm not pregnant, so I can't have a perinatal mood disorder. Not true. I haven't given birth to a baby, I can't have a mood disorder. Not true. It affects people who adopt, surrogacy, partners, not just the birthing parent.
Oh, wow.
And so we look, and especially with fertility challenges, there's so much of loss and grief and hope and pregnancy losses, even without fertility. Just that's such a huge part of a lot of people's stories, that we say, there's so much help out there, even in that early planning. Like there's great groups, there's great individual treaters, there's so much support that people don't have to struggle alone, because it feels like you're all alone.
Now, how do you get word out for that particular? We'll talk about other stuff afterwards. But
sure.
How do you let people know that it's normal to grieve during this process, and how they can go get help?
Yeah, my hope is that fertility centers do a really good job of that. I think especially when people are going through the process, there's so many appointments, there's so many social workers, there's a lot of eyes on people, so there's a lot of catches.
Yeah,
and
you're
meeting
under
with
a microscope.
Exactly. So there's a lot of appointments, there's a lot of assessments, there's a lot of people saying, hey, here are these groups you can go to. So the hope is that the centers are doing a good job. But I think it's also, if people are opening up to their family members, and people say, I have a sister who had this, and so a lot of it is word of mouth, and hopefully some of the stigma is breaking down, that we can talk about this and people can share their stories without feeling, oh my gosh, I was the only one.
Right. How can you break down that stigma? I mean, I know you're working on
Yeah,
it,
we do it like this. Talking about
works.
it. Yeah, there's, PSI has really good support groups out there. They hold these organizations, it's called Climb Out of the Darkness, so they do walks. across the, internationally. And so people are trying to get the awareness. And I think there's some really good organizations and advocacy, and on the federal level, the state level, celebrities are opening up. So I think people are starting to get the word out.
Normalize it.
Yeah, and I always tell people to commonize it. It's common, it's not normal. And it's a nice distinction.
I knew that wasn't the right word.
No, but and I was saying it for years in my career, like, oh, it's normal. And then I heard that, and it was like this switch of, oh, but it's not normal, but it's common.
Right.
Like so many, 1 in 5 or 1 in 7 women will have a perinatal mood disorder during pregnancy and postpartum. 1 in 10 dads.
Really? Mm-hmm. That sounds kind of surprising.
I know.
Because I was thinking, again, this is another reason why you're here, because I was always under the impression that the postpartum mood swings, the postpartum depression was strictly hormonal.
Right, and it's not. And we know now so much more that it's not just hormonal. And I think, and even not that, my children are 5 and 8, and I thought the same thing. Oh, well, after my hormones kind of regulate, I'll be okay. Yeah. But it's not just hormonal. And I think the research showing that that surrogacies, adoptive parents can also struggle with a mood disorder. That it's not just the hormones, it's the life transitions, the stressors going on.
Because I was going to say, what does cause it?
Yeah, there's so many factors, but so we look at it like, what are risk factors? So somebody who's had a mood disorder in the past, somebody who has a family history of a mood disorder. We look at overall support systems, kind of institutional support systems, family support systems, access to resources.
Do you think age has something to do with, like, the age of the...
Yeah, and so it's interesting. And before we jumped on today, I was looking back at some of my research things, and especially age, like teenagers. So during that hormonal shift, and also older moms that are in the perimenopausal period. So they're having their own set of hormone shifts that are different than somebody in their, that are a little bit younger, 20s or 30s, giving birth.
But it also seems like in society today, a lot of women are waiting until they're in their 30s and almost 40s.
And 40s, sure.
To have a child. And do you see, like, the mental health issues following the trends of the older moms?
I think some of the research coming out is showing some age are more susceptible. I also think, like, when we look at, why people are waiting longer to have children, particularly for moms, a lot of it is career-based. And so if you're in a career and you're taking a typical maternity leave in the United States and you're given 12 weeks and you're only 12 weeks postpartum and you're sent back to work full time, and then you're juggling, okay, well, maybe my baby is just starting to sleep at home and now I'm working 40 hours a week.
Right.
Or it's a big identity shift.
And you're not sleeping either.
And you're not sleeping, right. And I think a lot of people, I think in society, we say, oh, it's so great. Motherhood is so great. And I would say, well, parts of it are great, but there's a lot of
always.
Right. There's a lot of parts that aren't, and so I think particularly for people who wait to have children, then there's an extra level of shame and guilt that they're not feeling well because they've wanted this for so long or they waited for so long. So we do a really good job guilting our moms.
Yeah.
We're so good at guilting, and we're getting better at supporting.
I was about to say, we're getting better at guilting? No. So when do you usually meet your clients?
My clients?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I meet clients anytime during so people reach out that they've been trying to get pregnant and they just want to talk to somebody because they have had anxiety or depression in the past and they kind of want to get ahead of the curve. I see a lot of people who've had losses, and so they've been referred from, like, their hospital social worker or their OBs, that they're kind of in this loss period. I always like to specify with, people post-loss, that's not a depression, you're grieving. Grief is really normal and natural. And I think even, becoming a mother is a grieving process. It's this identity shift.
Right, because you are no longer, I am no longer Linda. I am this kid's mom.
Right, and then you're called mom 50 times at least 50 times a day. So I'll see, like I said, so people who are thinking about having kids and they, want to get ahead of it, people who are already been diagnosed with a mood disorder, people who say, hey, my husband says that I'm crying all the time and I should talk to somebody, or I haven't slept in a couple days and maybe I should reach out. So kind of everywhere along that process.
I haven't slept for a couple of days. For me, it was like a couple of months.
Yeah. Yeah.
Days, oh, I'll get over it.
Right.
Now, because you have a private practice, do you find yourself partnering with other practices or hospitals or, other organizations?
Sure. I think like within the mental health community, we do a pretty good job of, it's a lot of it is that you seek out the support, so group supervisions and colleagues that are in practice. And so a lot of us will refer to each other. Being part of PSI has helped kind of get this referral network and other colleagues to kind of call on. And the social work, there are a number of social workers embedded in primary care offices now and OB offices. And so they do a really nice job.
I ever knew that.
Yeah, they're starting.
Okay.
At pediatricians' offices, that's like another good place that new moms are kind of screened and assessed.
Wow.
And so a lot of pediatric practices will
So
have
the
help.
pediatrician's office looks for the mom's health as well.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so
They're
a lot
pretty
of them will
sneaky.
screen. I know. I'm not sure if it's mandated. I have to double check on that. But a lot of them just do the screening, and then they'll have their own behavioral health person that, if a mom scores whatever, and then they'll get referred.
Well, both of my kids are double digits, so I'm sure in the past 10, 11 years, that practice has changed a bit.
Probably.
So.
Probably.
Now, okay, I'm kind of looking through my questions, but I'm also thinking, as you started talking about networking and working with partnering organizations, how has the pandemic or the virtual world affected your client base?
Sure.
Because there's been so much anxiety in the past year and a half that's just common anxiety.
Yeah.
And now throw in the complications and all of the situational issues that go along with becoming a parent or trying to become a parent.
Yeah.
How does that affect your practice?
I think most mental health clinicians will say it's exploded. There's just so many people who need help, who are reaching out. There's not enough of any of us. But I think particularly with the pandemic, parenting I found is really hard for people. I know I struggled, particularly in the beginning, and I'm not
especially
postpartum.
If you're working full time and
Right.
you have to homeschool,
Sure.
and your kids are there, and
But I think especially what the pandemic has highlighted is how huge connection, how important connection is. And now we've taken, this whole group of people and said, well, you can't connect. You can't meet in person. You can't do new mom groups. You can't go to the lactation consultant's office and sit around with 6 other moms and cry that nursing is so hard.
Right.
And so it's further this isolation of, well, I'm the only one sitting in 3 a.m. trying to nurse this baby who doesn't want to latch.
And Zoom phone call, Zoom calls just aren't the same.
They aren't. I will say I do find one of the benefits, and I know even when I continue back to full-time in-person sessions, I'm going to keep telehealth part of my practice, because I do think, especially for this population, it's made it really accessible to get therapy. Right. If a mom doesn't have to try and figure out childcare for 3 other kids, then drive to an appointment, have an hour session, and drive home, she can pop on a video call.
Yeah.
So it's been really convenient for that. So I think accessing service has been really beneficial. But I think there's been this huge gap of just isolation, especially for new parents.
Because I remember feeling really isolated, and it was just so much work to get out of the house that a lot of times I didn't do it. It was a struggle to go grocery shopping.
Oh, yeah.
And I only had one.
Right. Right. And then I think there is this added layer of COVID. And, it is a common worry. So when we're looking at, okay, there's this common level of anxiety, but is this anxiety debilitating?
Right.
And so it's been, it's been tricky to, help calm people in an appropriate way, and also hold room for, it's really anxious to have a newborn right now.
Okay. I know we touched upon this a little bit earlier, but, my own personal experience, I really want to delve into the fertility issue part, because I remember going to an adoption conference, and there was, I don't know if she was a social worker or what, but she was talking about the grieving process of deciding you're no longer going to have your own child, you're going to adopt. And I remember she said, in our society, success and succeeding is so important. If you work hard in high school, you'll go to a good college. If you work hard in college, you'll get a good job. Mm-hmm. If you work hard at your job, you'll be able to afford a nice house. Mm-hmm. No matter how hard you work, you're not going to have a kid.
Yeah.
And how do you advise somebody to get over that mental block where you feel like a failure because it's like, I'm not working hard enough, I'm not doing the right things?
Yeah. That's a great question. I don't necessarily think that in my practice, if I would necessarily tell somebody you get over that hump, you acknowledge the hump, that it's there, and you allow grief, and you label it and you name it as grief, and that there is nothing wrong with you for feeling like a failure. So I think we have this tendency in our society to want to fix it. Like, I want to take that bad feeling away from you. Like, I don't want you to feel like a failure. And of course I wouldn't want you to feel that, but I'm going to hold room for, I'm going to allow you to feel it in here, and we're going to say all these things we wish we could say out of here. And I think particularly with fertility challenges, it's hard. We live in a wonderful medical society and community here in Boston, and the doctors are promising people the moon. You can't get pregnant? Great, I'll give you IVF and I'll make you a baby. And
it doesn't always happen.
And it doesn't always happen. And that process of getting a baby ignores this whole, there's likely a lot of loss along the way.
Right.
Either pregnancy losses or just the loss of hope.
And also that it has to put strain on a relationship.
Sure.
And it's like, I remember, like, before I got married, everybody was saying, oh, you know, are you going to have kids? And, oh, great, you're going to have kids. You want to have kids.
Right.
But they never say, well, what do you think, what will happen if you can't?
Right.
And I think that question right there is so important because you are two different people in this relationship, and you might have different visions of what a family should look like.
Right, right.
You know, a friend of mine, her husband, you know, once they found out they couldn't have kids, he was so anti-adoption. And it's like she wanted, and so it almost to the point of caused them some serious marital issues. So do you find yourself dealing with being a marriage counselor as well as all of this?
So personally, I don't, because I don't do much couples counseling.
Okay.
So I have some great therapists that I refer out to for that. I will see couples for loss, like around pregnancy or infant loss. So I do some couples work there. But the fertility, there's wonderful specialists. I'm just not one of them.
So you could refer, so there are people out there.
There are people, yes.
So how do you get, I think we kind of already talked about that. You know, how do you advise, how do you think discussing fertility and fertility issues has changed since you began your practice?
I think it's much more common, and I think much more people are talking about it and knowing about it. I do think that, I think on the medical side, there's a real big rush for fertility treatments and fertility testing. I know even, you know, like I said, I had one daughter in San Diego and I had one daughter here in Massachusetts, and the amount of testing that was offered to me for things, I was like, my kids are only 2 years apart. Have times changed that much? So I do think that because we're in this, which is great, we're in a wonderful place for medical care, but there's a big rush for fertility, and there's not that much room for, okay, we need to be sad. And we just need to sit in the sadness for a little bit. We can do both. We can explore fertility and sit in the sadness. But I do think more people are talking about it. I mean, the numbers are 1 in 4 couples will struggle with some type of fertility challenge. Wow. So they're high.
I didn't realize it was that common.
It is, and I think that's the thing, that everybody feels like, oh my gosh, I don't know anybody else who's going through this. Because they're either not talking about it, there's shame, there's a lot of failure guilt on both sides for, you know, men, women. You know, it's much more common, you know, I think even that idea, you know, we're talking about right now some pretty like heteronormative narratives, right?
Right.
Versus people who are in same-sex couples fertility is always part of their dialogue.
Right.
And so how do we support people who aren't just man and woman struggling?
Okay.
There's
Wow.
so
Okay.
much, I know.
Like, ooh. Okay, so let's go into the postpartum.
Yeah.
So how long does postpartum usually last?
Like a postpartum mood disorder.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hard part, is there's no time frame. But I
Okay.
think the important message is that with treatment, people will get better.
Okay.
So I think that's a really important message for people to hold, is that there is help, there is treatment. I also think that people are under the impression that, oh, postpartum depression, so that's the only type of mood disorder. When we know that's why we call them perinatal mood and anxiety
okay.
disorders. So we look at postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, PTSD. So a lot there can
Really?
a lot of people don't have, there's a lot of birth trauma that is not talked about at all. I mean, I hear it because obviously what I do.
Right. Okay.
But there's a lot of birth trauma, and even just that trauma of, well, things didn't go as I expected them to go, and I had such high expectations. With birth, with delivery, with pregnancy. Postpartum OCD is another one that we're seeing more of.
Oh, wow.
Mhm.
Okay.
I know, all these things that we just don't know about. So we hear postpartum depression, so I think it's important because moms will say, well, I'm not crying all the time, so I can't have a perinatal mood disorder. I can't have a postpartum mood disorder. And so then we dig a little bit further, or they'll say, well, my doctor referred me, but I really wasn't that sad. But then you ask, and people are so worried about leaving baby because their anxiety is so high, they're not leaving the house, or they're staying up for hours on end to watch baby sleep so that nothing's happening. And there's a lot more than just postpartum depression.
Okay.
There's postpartum bipolar disorder. And then the rare occurrences would be like a postpartum psychosis.
Wow. Now, when you first met, when you just mentioned like watching the baby sleep, have you seen in your experience that some of the depression or some of the mood disorders happen after the first child versus not first child?
Sure. So
Is there like a correlation?
So people are at higher risk for developing another postpartum mood disorder if they've already had one.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean, I think exactly what you said, it doesn't mean if you have one birth and you felt okay, it doesn't mean you won't develop a postpartum mood disorder with your second.
Okay.
And so I think sometimes there can be more shame reaching out after the second because there's a lot of pressure of, well, I should know what I'm doing. I've done this before.
Yeah.
Right? And then you add on a second or a third or a fourth. And so we look at all the other factors of, wow, if you're adding that much more children, what's that stress level like in the house? And then you're
Right.
pulled in all of these different directions.
Right. Now, I'm realizing I'm saying now a lot. I'm sorry. When I was at the new mom stage, whether I assumed or whether I was told that the postpartum mood disorders were hormonal.
Right.
Now, is there a difference between a postpartum depression versus just a depression?
Sure.
Or is it the same thing?
No, it's a great question. So, and I think especially, the baby blues. I'm not sure if so the baby
Everybody
blues.
talks about those.
Everybody talks about the baby blues. So 80% of women will have the baby blues, and that's that hormone flux. And so 2 to 3 weeks after birth, we expect that to kind of stabilize a little bit.
Okay.
And so it doesn't mean that if I see somebody who's 7 days post-birth and they're really depressed, I'm not going to say, oh, well, you just have the baby blues, so come see me in 2 weeks and we'll see if your hormones kind of normalize. So you can be diagnosed with a postpartum mood disorder even right after birth.
Oh, okay.
But so there is some expected mood fluctuation based on hormones. And that would be those baby blues, 80% of women. I know I was okay after my first. Those baby blues were tough after my second, and it really took me by surprise, even as a mental health professional.
Wow. Okay.
And, I'm very lucky I have a really supportive partner, but it was like, oh my, but I was okay after my oldest, so I should have been okay.
Well, everybody tells you that each child is different.
Right.
So each pregnancy is different.
Right.
And your mood is impacted by all of those differences.
Right, and baby's temperament too. You know, some babies, if they're colicky, if they're crying all the time.
So babies aren't supposed to scream for 3 hours a night every night?
I know. Nobody told you, right?
No.
Right. They just said, oh, congratulations, they're so beautiful. We'll see you in 6 months.
They'll get over the crankies.
Right. This is normal.
This is normal.
Nobody sleeps when they have a baby. And that's the big thing we look at is sleep and how much sleep impacts mood.
So have you seen, okay, so we talked a little bit about, you know, postpartum depression, baby blues.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen trends in age, socioeconomic status, race, family history? Is there a difference? Can you kind of target this person is more likely to experience a mood disorder?
Short answer, no. So we can look at family history and we can look at a woman's or a man's personal history.
Okay.
But mental health in general and even perinatal and postpartum mental health doesn't discriminate. Doesn't discriminate age, sex, race, socioeconomic status, none of that. So we can't look at some, and I think that's why it's a hidden disease.
Okay.
Because we can't look at, you know, a doctor and I can't look at my practice and say, well, that person's going to get a mood disorder. I can say, well, based on their family history, their own history, kind of some of the stressors, what's everybody's stress level like? Do they have access to food? Do they have access to resources? If you don't have access, some of that will put you in a higher risk. But I think people are also really resilient. And so resiliency can really protect against a mood disorder. So, but I think there is this idea that, oh, well, you know, we can narrow it down, but we really can't.
When we're talking about a mood disorder during pregnancy,
Yes.
I know women have to be incredibly careful with medications, with food, with diet, you know, diet and exercise while they're pregnant. Sometimes a clinical disorder is a chemical imbalance, and therapy won't help.
Oh,
and
yeah.
they do need to rely on medication.
Yes, yes.
Are these medications safe during pregnancy? Or do you have to, does a woman, when she's pregnant, have to not take medications or avoid certain medications?
No, there's great, and we are, you know, I am lucky in my practice that I have some wonderful other private practice psychiatric nurse practitioners and reproductive psychiatrists that I refer out to. We're so fortunate in Massachusetts. Mass General's right down the street. They have a wonderful women's center for mental health, and they are
sometimes just talk therapy is just not going to
right.
work.
Oh, of course, exactly. And so, and we look at risk benefit. And so the risk to baby of an untreated mood disorder can be worse than the risk of going on a medication that is well studied, that is, you know, they have so much good evidence and so much good research behind. So untreated, a mom's untreated mood disorder can have even worse implications for baby and for mom than treating.
Have there been any studies that actually track a child born to a couple or a woman who has experienced a mood disorder? Is that child more predisposed, or does that just go back to family history?
A lot of it goes back to family history and attachment to mom and baby. If a mom is so depressed that, you know, or so anxious that she's afraid to hold baby, she's not attaching with baby, she's not bonding, that will have different implications. I'm sure there's studies.
I'm just wondering if like long-term studies are done.
Yeah, I mean, there's wonderful research in long-term studies, and most of them are showing that these things are safe. But I always refer to the psychiatric specialists. And we're so lucky, we have some really good ones.
Can we touch upon, I know we've talked a lot right now about the depression. What about the anxiety, the PTSD?
Oh, yeah.
Can we go into a little more depth about some of those?
Sure. What would you like to know? Like what they look like, what we look for? Yeah, of course. So I think
do they always go hand in hand with depression?
They don't have, people, you know, people can have a postpartum anxiety and not be depressed at all. And so
let's go into anxiety for a little while,
anxiety.
I think anxiety is...
Right, I think we all have anxiety, especially during pandemic. and it's not going away. So I think we look at anxiety and we expect, new parents are anxious. There is a level of anxiety that is expected.
Because they have this little human that they don't know what to do with.
Right. You spend 2 to 4 days in the hospital, and then you look at your partner and you say, oh my gosh, they're letting us take them home? Like, with just
And
us?
the only requirement is they have to have a name and you have to have a car seat.
Right. And then, where's the manual that they're supposed to come with?
And you can't send them back.
Right. They're yours for life. And so there's typical anxiety, but when we look at a postpartum anxiety, it's really, we look at how is it affecting your functioning? Are you not sleeping because you're so worried? Are you not leaving the house? Are you not letting anyone else take care of baby? Are you just spinning and revving in your head and you can't calm down? Are you not able to calm in periods when you feel like you should be? And some moms will say I just don't feel right. I can't tell you what it is, but I just don't feel right. Yeah. So then we'll look at okay, well, what does that mean? What does that feeling right look like? And moms are really perceptive. They know that just something's not right.
Yeah. I don't feel like myself.
Right. I don't feel like myself. I knew I'd feel weird after having birth, but I didn't think it was going to feel like this. And so then we delve into, sleep is the big one. We look at worries. Are they expected worries? Are they, do they feel like they're a little bit more than expected worries? OCD falls under anxiety in terms of mood disorders. And so, we call OCD the bizarre thoughts. Are you, I'll ask my moms, a lot of moms will say, and these are hard topics to talk about, but they have thoughts of wanting to hurt their babies or thoughts of wanting to hurt themselves.
And that's OCD?
It can be an OCD. So
really?
It's different because we look at intent. The moms that say, and I was so scared by this thought that then I had to perform a ritual or then I had to do something to make that thought go away.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Or I'm thinking OCD is going and check and make sure the baby's still breathing and then leave and then go back in and then leave and then go back in.
Yep, OCD has a lot of
different... That's kind of what I was thinking.
Right, OCD has a lot of flavors and a lot of different appearances. But yeah, especially those feelings, and it's so hard for moms to say, yeah, I had that thought, that I was going to hurt my baby or
because
somebody else.
Because it's a feeling of failure.
It's a feeling of failure. And there's so much stigma surrounding that. And in the rare occurrences is that postpartum psychosis. And that's that big difference where people do want to hurt themselves or they do want to hurt babies or that it's just this out of touch with reality. And so that's really a medical emergency that we send people straight, to the emergency department to get treatment. But the anxiety, and I think a lot of people are told as a new mom, well, you're just going to be anxious. Of course you're anxious, you're a new mom. And meanwhile, mom is thinking, oh my gosh, but I'm not sleeping and I'm checking constantly and I can't be in a different room because I can't tolerate, being away from baby for more than a couple minutes. So then we want to see
And nobody else can take care of my baby because they don't understand my baby like I do.
Right, or I'm a failure if I have to ask for help.
That's another big one.
Right.
Okay.
Rage is another kind of underlying with postpartum depression.
Really?
We're thankfully talking about more kind of this irritation level that just gets so high that mom feels like a switch can go off and she's just going to explode.
Wow.
So we call that a postpartum rage, can be a symptom of depression.
Okay. And are these all hormonal or
No,
not necessarily?
It doesn't have to be hormones. It can be just having a mood disorder. Kind of the different stressors going on. Is mom getting a break during the day? Or, is mom up all night trying to feed baby and take care of baby, and then waking hours has toddlers and school-age children, and now we're in a pandemic, so you're trying to remote learn with your kids and a new baby, and everything just gets harder and harder.
Wow.
And then the PTSD piece you were asking about.
Yeah.
So a lot of that, and we're doing a nice job, I feel like, in the mental health community of redefining kind of what trauma looks like. And that trauma is really, how somebody experienced the trauma to themselves. So there are a lot of birth traumas that occur, and we don't talk about them because, you're supposed to go to the hospital, give birth, and go home, and it's happily ever after.
Exactly.
And so a lot of moms will have flashbacks, nightmares, things associated with that we would diagnose as a PTSD.
Wow. Now, could PTSD also not only be the actual birth experience, but the planning phase.
Oh, yeah.
Moving into, if you had a traumatic experience trying to have a baby, baby number one,
Yeah.
and then you experience these flashbacks
Yes.
if you want to have a second, or
Yes.
if you can't have a second.
Yes, all of that, all of the above.
It's complicated, isn't it?
It's very complicated.
Okay, your website states that you focus or have trained in different techniques.
Sure.
Can we talk about some of those
Yeah,
techniques?
of course.
Like cognitive behavioral therapy.
I know, it sounds so
Sounds very
official.
intellectual.
It does. It does.
So what exactly does that mean? Is
Right.
that just like talk therapy, or?
So talk therapy is one modality of therapy. So CBT is kind of a more specific cognitive behavioral therapy. So we really look at, we draw this like classic triangle, how your thoughts affect your behaviors and affect your emotions. And so there's this nice CBT wheel. And so we do a lot of dismantling that. And I'm sure you've heard of terms like distorted thinking, black and white thinking. These are all kind of stem from CBT. So really helping people kind of see,
Put their feelings in those different
and how our
categories, or?
thoughts really impact our emotions and our behaviors. And we can control our thoughts. And that if
Sometimes.
and if we can feel more in control of our thoughts, then the goal is that we feel more in control of our emotions, or that it changes our emotions and our behaviors.
Okay. Sometimes, though, changing the behavior eventually links back to changing the thoughts. Does it ever go that way?
It can,
Or do you?
No, it's like this nice little wheel that it goes around. Yeah.
It's like a sphere that just.
Right, and we
goes
call that more
going.
like habituation or learning. Like if I do this behavior over and over enough, I'm going to learn that I feel different, and then I'm going to think differently.
Okay.
So it's this nice way
Because
of.
I'm thinking in other aspects of your life,
Yeah.
like trying to lose weight.
Sure.
Just start drinking more water, and eventually, or
Right.
start eating more vegetables, and then eventually the patterns will change. Eventually your mindset will change.
Right.
But change the behavior first.
Right.
So
And
that's kind of
Yeah.
where it was coming from.
Yeah.
What is solution-focused therapy? Isn't all therapy solution-focused? Because you
Not
want to get better.
really.
You want to.
Sometimes I think that's like a misnomer of therapy, is that
Okay.
some people just want to be heard too. Some people just want to tell their story. Some people want to have that talk therapy, that narrative therapy. So solution focused is a little bit more specific. So
Okay.
sometimes it's shorter term. It's, this is my goal. How are we going to get to there?
Okay. Can you actually put a timeline on, I want to be better in 6 months, or I
No.
want to be better?
I mean, maybe.
Does it ever work?
Maybe. I usually solution focused I associate more with like something really short term tangible. And it feels more
Okay.
like, oh, okay, like these are the steps I have to take to get there. I don't use it as much in this population.
Okay. All right. We'll move on.
Yeah.
Motivational
I
interviewing.
know, it's another big term. So it's another term, so that a lot of those were used more when I did like addiction treatment. So it's a nice way of
I'm thinking of Arlie Ermy, the
Oh,
Marine
yeah.
going, I'm going to motivate you to.
I know, no, I'm not that. I don't yell at my clients often. Just
That's
kidding.
motivational.
So really kind of where people are at, where they are in their motivation to change, how to support them in this change wheel process, what steps would have to, what would it look like, what would change be like. It's kind of more
And
of
just
a,
kind of map out.
yeah, or kind of helping see like, okay, well, if this isn't where you want to be, what would where you want to be look like?
Okay. And can that change along the way?
Oh, yeah, of course. Everything is fluid.
Oh, fluidity.
Yes.
Love it. Mindfulness.
Yes, mindfulness I
How
like.
do you get in the right mindset? I mean, if you're not thinking rational thoughts, how do you?
I think you hold space that this is my chapter right now. So mindfulness, and I use a lot of mindfulness with CBT. So mindfulness will be a lot of grounding exercises, calm app, kind of the meditation, some of the ones that we hear more. And I think these are good tools and practices, even if we're not in this perinatal period or postpartum. Just the idea of wanting to center and kind of feel more
Keep you
present.
from going down that road.
Exactly. So, and we use a lot of mindfulness with the new moms, especially, and I'm sure, and you've said you've had children, when they're crying at 3 in the morning, it feels like they're never going to stop. They are just they're gonna cry the rest of their lives, and this is your life. So that
Basically, yeah.
exactly.
Or scream. Mine were screamers.
Scream.
They didn't cry,
right.
they screamed.
They're just gonna scream forever. And
And neighbors are going to call DSS.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
I'm not killing her.
Right. So that mindfulness piece is that real grounding, like this is the moment, this moment will pass. This moment feels so hard. And so a lot of self-talk, a lot of grounding, a lot of that mindfulness piece of, okay, this is where I'm at right now. This is so hard right now. Tomorrow will look different.
I think I needed that advice, 13 years ago.
I think I can still use it now.
I can still use that advice. Exactly. What should someone do? I know we touched upon this earlier, but I kind of really want to focus on what should someone do if she or he thinks they are experiencing a perinatal mood disorder.
Tell someone supportive. Call their doctor and tell them, go on the website. I'm always happy to help link people with resources. Contact their local support coordinator, tell their loved one, just tell someone. I always tell people, don't worry alone. You don't want to worry alone.
That is good advice.
Thank you. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that so much of mental health in general, it's mental, it's in our heads. We sit in it and we hold it so close because there's, for a number of reasons, there's shame, there's guilt, there's so much that goes into it. So reach out to anybody.
Have you ever experienced or aware of a family intervening? So
tell me what you're thinking.
The spouse, if a new parent is experiencing a mood disorder, whatever kind of mood disorder it is, but isn't acknowledging it because they feel like a failure.
Oh, of course.
And having the significant other or their parent coming in and saying,
I'm worried.
You need to do something.
Yes, of course. And especially, not as much in my practice side, but on my support coordinator role, the other hat I wear, I will have a lot of grandparents, spouses. I'm really worried about my partner. How can I connect them? Yes. And then we kind of give them tools. We give them, sheets to go over, words to help say that I'm worried about you.
Because a lot of time, my understanding is, unless that person really wants to get help, or I don't want to say get fixed, but they want, unless they want to improve the situation or change the situation, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Like, how can you modify a behavior if they don't want to change that behavior?
Sure. Well, and I think, and then we can support partners, we can support grandparents of, okay, well, if your loved one isn't ready yet for help, what else can you do to kind of lighten the load in the house? How many meals trains can you set up? Who needs to come do, right? Who needs to come do laundry? Who needs to help with this stuff? Who needs to just sit with them and say, I'm worried about you. When you're ready, I have some really good resources I can connect you with.
Or I will go watch your child, while you go take a nap or something.
Right. Yes.
But okay, I pretty much finished these questions, but I'm trying to, formulate other things.
Yeah.
And now I've just completely lost my train of thought. Do you have any interesting stories to tell? Or is there anything that we haven't touched upon? Well, I think of my last question that has totally escaped.
I think we went over that it can be more than just postpartum depression, which I think is really important. People know it can be anxiety, OCD, PTSD. How to get help, I think, is really important.
How do you know if you suspect someone of needing help? How do you know the correct help to give them? Is there a correct form of help?
You mean like as a therapist?
No,
or
as a friend.
As a friend.
Or as a family member.
Yeah. I think offering support is always going to be a good one. So even just the simple statement of, I'm worried about you, can open so many conversations. Or I've noticed you haven't showered in the past couple of days. I'm starting to worry. I'm here for you. And I think
I'm coming over and you're taking a shower.
Right. And I think it's hard, you know, and I hear that what happens when a partner doesn't want to get help. I will say, and maybe this is just obviously my anecdotal evidence from my practice, is that, you know, my moms that are there, they really want to see me. They really want to get better. They don't want to feel like this.
Right.
They want to enjoy.
Well, because there are good parts of
Right, there are good parts.
Kid.
And they've been sold this story that you're supposed to love this. And so why they want to love it. They're not choosing this. And I think that's the other really important. Nobody chooses to have a postpartum anxiety or depression or be miserable. Right. Right. And so there's, you know, it happens, and then we can treat it. And I think that's the important message, is that it's treatable with therapy, with medication, with alternative therapies, yoga, mindfulness, whatever it takes, with support. It's treatable. People don't have to suffer alone.
Now, in the support groups
Yes.
that you've talked about, who can be involved in those support groups? I'm just thinking, like, if there's a mom who had experienced this but now has college-age kids.
Yeah.
Could that mom go back and be supportive?
Yeah, I think there are. There's some really good, so within PSI, there's some specialized support coordinators. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I feel like that has come up recently in one of our forums. People who say, oh my gosh, if I had only known then. And yes, the short answer is yes. I can always email you the support groups. I just don't know them off the top of my head.
Well, that's kind of what I'm thinking. If somebody's watching going, oh my gosh, I wish I knew about this. Like I said to you, in our email correspondence, I wish I knew you 15 years ago.
Right.
Well, now I've kind of gone beyond that.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I don't want anyone to have to go through what I went through.
And I think that's where a lot of people then, on the other side, on the tail end, they come into this activism piece of, I want to help other moms. I want to help other partners so that they don't have to feel like this too. And so there's really good volunteer roles that people can do, peer support models of, and I think there is a lot of value in someone seeing in a support group, yeah, I was there 10 years ago and it got better.
Right.
That can be so valuable to hear when you're in the trenches of, oh my gosh, this is going to be my new life.
But it's going to take 10 years.
Right. And then being...
That's kind of scary in itself.
Sure, but it doesn't have to. And then that story of, gosh, if I had gotten help 10 years ago, it wouldn't have had to be so hard.
Exactly. So if someone suspected, just where would they start to go look for help? I mean,
I always direct people to PSI, it's postpartum.net.
Okay.
I think it's a really nice website because it gives kind of what to do if my daughter, my son, my loved one is suffering, signs to look out for. I give the handouts to my clients, my pregnant clients. I give the handouts to their partners. And so there's a lot of good tools on there of how do I have this conversation? What's in my state? What's in my area? Where do I go for help? There's really good books. There's so much.
I'm also thinking, what happens in the event that someone does not get help? Like we talked about the OCD.
Yeah.
If somebody starts to have thoughts of wanting to hurt their baby or hurt themselves, and they don't get help, I mean, what are the options there? Is that child, if a new mom does something, either leaves or harms herself, what happens to that child? I mean, does that child definitely go into like DSS care?
No, and I think that, and I'm so glad you brought that up. I think that's a big reason why people don't reach out for help, because they think, oh my gosh, if I admit this, DCF is going to come take my baby. And that is not the case.
I'm sorry, DCF.
Yeah, I know it's different in every place. But I think that is a big reason why people don't reach out for a number of reasons. Either they've had past DCF experience, or they know somebody who has, or they're just fearful of the system, or they've had a bad experience in an ER before. But that is not a reportable crime. Having that thought is not something that we would report for anybody. We would get them help. We would get them to an emergency department. We would get them the psychiatric care that they need.
Any parting thoughts? We have about 2 minutes left.
2 minutes. Oh my goodness.
Well,
I didn't prepare a closing statement.
Closing statements.
I know. No, I'm just really excited to be here. I hope that people know that they're not alone, that there are so many people that struggle, but they don't have to struggle alone. And we can connect them with support. We can see them in therapy. We can see them in groups. We can get them the help that they need.
Anecdotal. How were you when you were a mom? And if you don't want to answer this, you don't have to, but I'm just thinking,
Sure.
when you were a new mom,
Yeah.
how were you able to separate the professional you with the mom you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually didn't narrow down my focus completely and really start working fully all in until I was a couple years out of that new momming, personally. And there are some great practitioners that do.
I'm a social worker. I know all about kids.
Right.
I should be fine. I should be the perfect mom.
Right.
You know,
Right.
Mary Poppins, come,
Right.
hire
And,
me.
and I will disclose to my clients too, like, I yell at my kids. I'm human. I'm not this, magical, mythical, calm, collected all the time. No, I'm still a mom too. And so I will, I use disclosure sparingly, but if it will help people feel like, oh my gosh, I yelled, my kid watched 2 hours of TV. Yeah. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Mm-hmm. Who's not watching 2 hours of TV?
It's like you have to decide, do you want your child to have screen time?
Right.
Or do you want your sanity?
Exactly. And so a lot of normalizing with that of,
Right.
we're kind of all in this pandemic parenting trenches together. But personally, and I'm lucky I have a really supportive partner. And so he, like you said about your husband in the beginning, he's on daddy duty tonight. And he, he was kind of my rock through it of, hey, you need to sleep. We're going to help fix this.
Right.
And so I'm fortunate, and not everybody is that fortunate.
And I think the stigma of having a mental illness is no longer being as big of a stigma.
Right.
I mean, there still is, just snap out of it. But
Right.
you can't tell your brain to just start thinking a different way.
Right.
Just like if you have high blood pressure, you can't say, okay, blood pressure,
Right.
quiet down.
Right. I equate it with diabetes and cardiac all the time with my clients. Like, we don't just tell your insulin, you'll get better, just give it some time. No, we treat it.
Right.
And I do think that the stigma is reducing. There is more awareness. There's more websites. There's more Instagram pages. There's probably TikToks that I don't understand.
No, I'm not going TikTok.
But I think the benefit of that is that people are getting, and so when you're scrolling at 2 a.m. with a screaming child because you need to stay awake, hopefully people are starting to see, oh wait, there's other people struggling too. There's some really good memes that I can relate to, whatever it is. So I'm hopeful that some of the stigma is, and doing things like this and just bringing awareness.
All right. Well, we are at a time.
Perfect.
Excellent. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having
I really
me.
enjoyed our conversation, and I hope I didn't, ask too many questions over and over. Sometimes, I still have mommy brain.
Yeah.
So I need repetitive. So thank you. And I also want to thank everyone for tuning in at home this evening. I hope you found our conversation as helpful as I did. And I hope you enjoy this beautiful weather, what's left of the summer, and I will see you around town. Good night.